I work as a sheriff in a small town, located out in the Midwest. I'm not going to tell you the exact town that I live in, because it is seriously small. I'm talking just a few thousand people at most, and I do not want to dox myself or for people to see this and become very frightened. It's something that we tried to keep under wraps as much as possible in order to just keep people calm. It's a small town, so people obviously talk and know tidbits of information. But the only people who know the exact entire story is myself and the few officers that I worked with. This only happened over the course of a few weeks. I got a rather exasperated visit from a young woman early in the morning, screaming at me about how her dead father had gone missing. I asked her to clarify what she meant, and she told me that she went to his grave as usual to lay down flowers and discovered that it was a mess and that his body was gone. I asked her how she knew, and she told me that she could see. I took a statement down from her and tried to calm her down as much as I possibly could, and then I headed out to the little cemetery just a short distance away from the small town. No, this cemetery is not actually inside of the town. There is a path that leads down to it, but it's probably a good 5 or 10-minute walk away and is pretty secluded. I knew immediately what she meant when I got there. Her father's grave. It looked as if someone had gotten down onto their hands and their knees and just started using their hands to grab handfuls of dirt and just chucked it in every which direction. There were clumps of dirt scattered in the middle of the stone path, thrown onto headstones, covering up flowers that had been laid down for other relatives. Whoever it was had not at all bothered to completely cover the grave back up. The dirt had been shoved up to the sides, so it was like there was a little trench in the middle with a big gap and 2 walls of dirt at the side. The body was gone. The flowers that had been left on the grave, they looked like they'd had their petals ripped or torn off, and then they were just thrown down into the grave. The coffin was ancient and looked to have been rotting for quite a while, so it's no surprise that whoever took it did not need a tool to pry it open. It had this long splintering running down the side of the wood. I called another officer out there to try and help me. The only thing I could think to do right then and there was to fill the grave back in and try and tidy the place up to stop people from panicking immediately. I figured it would buy us enough time to discover whoever took it before people cottoned on. I had to go about it a certain way. It did not take long for the news to spread, but I still had to be careful how I talked about things. I had basically nothing to go on at all, and just a few days later, another body disappeared. It looked as if a shovel had been used to speed up the process this time, but still, whoever it was did not bother to cover up his tracks. I attempted to set up a trap and stake out the cemetery. I had officers on rotating shifts to make sure that no more bodies could be taken and so that we could catch this freak in the act. I actually caught a guy. I was just doing a patrol around the area and I caught sight of someone creeping up on the cemetery. He was not even trying to hide himself. It was at around 3 in the morning and I actually recognized the guy. He was only about 19 years old. His name was Marty. His mother passed away when he was pretty young and bounced around from house to house, living with various family members or just whoever would take him in, sometimes complete strangers. He did a lot of odd jobs for people to make money and was working from a pretty young age. He just recently got his own place to stay, only around 6 months ago. He was just wearing his regular clothes. He didn't have a shovel on his person. I called out to him and asked what he was doing, if he was here to see his mother. He kind of froze up on the spot and started looking all around him, so I flicked on my flashlight and he squinted and covered up his eyes. I called out that it wasn't safe around here right now, that bodies were going missing and that someone might hurt him. He just started sprinting away, like full on sprinting, like he was running for his life. I did not even bother to chase him. He moved much too quickly for me to catch him on foot, and at the time, very stupidly, I figured that maybe I had just scared him with what I said or something like that. Or that maybe he just wanted to visit his mother in private and did not want to go when everyone else was around. Another body went missing. I don't even know how. I never dozed off. I never did anything but patrol around the area. The most I was even turned away from the place was when I would go for a piss. Surely I would have seen someone. Surely they would not have the time to dig up a grave and remove a body and then fill it back in. I would not have even noticed the missing body if I did not see footprints around the area and the slight disturbance of the dirt. It had been raining just the day previous, so some of the dirt was a little slodgy, and so I could see full-on footprints. Whoever it was had not taken the care to scuff them up and hide them. Aside from those, there was a slight disturbance of the dirt. You could clearly see that it had been filled in just recently. When I dug the grave up, everything was gone. Even the damn coffin was gone. But the hole in the ground was way deeper than any regular grave. It looked to be twice the depth, and it looked as if it had turned into a sinkhole and that both the body and the coffin had been sucked away. I decided to take an officer with me to pay Morty a visit. I wanted to brush it off as him being scared or just a weirdo, but I had to check, and it was the only lead that we actually had. Before I went in, I asked around. Apparently, no one had seen him around for days. I was the last person to have seen him. This only made my suspicions worse, even though I did not want to believe them. I didn't want to believe this kid was capable of something so horrible, especially since he seemed like such a nice one. You know, I knew him from when he was young. He was always a quiet guy, shy, kept to himself, but always very respectful. His neighbor told me he'd heard him pretty late at night one time. They said they could smell a really horrible stench seeping in from next door, and that she could not get rid of it, no matter how much air freshener she sprayed. She told me that she could hear Morty talking to himself all night. She said that at first, she thought it was a TV show playing really loudly. But then she proceeded to tell me that she could hear Morty changing his accent and talking to himself really weirdly, saying all kinds of weird things. She told me that she banged really hard on the wall and screamed for him to shut up, and that was the last that she heard of him. I tried to knock or get a hold of anyone who knew Morty closely, but there was no luck there. I ended up having to break my way into his house. When I did, that smell hit me, that horrible, pungent smell. It smelled like earth, like a really damp, earthy smell, but there was also something rotting in the air. It smelled like food stuck between a tooth for years. That smell when you finally get the rotting food out and it just stinks of rot and like something died. The officer who was with me had to step outside immediately because he could not stop gagging, and I heard him puke the second that he got outside. I had to remove my shirt and tie it over my face just to be able to stay in there. I could not believe my eyes when I stepped into that house. I searched the entire house, and it just got stranger and stranger. When you walk into the house, the living room and the kitchen are basically the same room, but split up by a kitchen counter. And then he had one of those circular tables with some chairs set up around the TV. The fucking missing corpse. I don't even know how to explain it. There were two of them that had been placed into those chairs around the table and propped up so that it looked like they were eating and watching the TV. There were plates of food set out in front of them, along with utensils placed at the sides. The food on the plate looked like it used to be some kind of meat along with some vegetables, but whatever the vegetables were now looked brown and were falling apart, and the meat had flies just buzzing around it. The remains were basically just skeletons because they had been dead for so long. Some of them had chips either in the skull or in other places. Parts of the skeleton were crumbling into little pieces of dust that were just left on the floor or piled up on the chairs. I just couldn't wrap my fucking head around what I was seeing. The entire place was a mess. There were hundreds and hundreds of bucks piled up high in different corners of his rooms like he was a hoarder. There was dirt and grime trailed in onto the floor that was soaked into the carpets. I found 2 more corpses. I didn't even know about the 4th one. We only knew that 3 of them had gone missing. I went into his bathroom. He had the remains of a person in there, propped up, like they were clinging to the sides of the bathtub. The remains had been dressed in a shower cap and looked like it had actually been scrubbed clean. I could smell bleach in this room. These remains were not crumbling or anything and looked as if someone had used cleaning chemicals on the skeleton. There were rubber ducks in the bathroom, other bathtub toys too. It was so strange. And then I went up into Morty's bedroom. There was a bulge in the bed, and someone was pretty obviously sleeping in there. I had found the bastard. There was a cup of coffee left out on the nightstand from where I was that I could see, and there was a half-open book on the bed next to the space where the person was sleeping. I put my hand on my gun, and I got ready just in case he freaked out and tried anything. He very clearly was not in his right mind. I called out his name. I told him who I was and why I was here, and I told him to very slowly put his hands up onto his head and sit upwards. I got no response. I started shouting, telling Morty that he was in a lot of trouble and that he should not make this any harder on himself. I still got no response. This little freak did not move even an inch underneath those covers. I called out and I warned him. I told him that I did not want to do this, but that he forced my hand. I very slowly approached the bed, with my revolver aimed carefully, and I yanked the covers back off the bed with my free hand, and then I took a step backwards to create some distance between myself and Morty. I took one look, then two, then three, my eyes scanning rapidly back and forth. Then I lowered my gun, and I pretty much instinctively shot my hand upwards to cover my mouth. I still had the shirt wrapped around my face, but it was just an instinctual response to do this in shock. There was a body in that bed, but it was not Morty. That poor fucking man. I recognized the man in the bed. He was a local hunter, and he had only passed away just a few weeks back. He ended up messing up and falling and breaking his leg. There was no one in the nearby area to help him, and he had no service on his phone. He was pretty far away from this small town, as you could imagine, deep in the forests, near some cliffs and stuff. He could not even crawl, and he was only found a day or two later. Rescue people were not able to find him in time, even though they were called pretty much straight away. Like I said, he had not been dead for long, so his body, well, in this bed, it was not a skeleton like the rest of them. It was in the active process of decomposition, and let's just say that it was a horrible, horrible sight to see. The body had originally been buried wearing the suit that he wore for his wedding. I watched his wife sob out her heart while he was lowered. I watched his little daughter try and run and jump into his grave because she didn't want them to take Daddy away. She told her mother that she wanted to be with Daddy. And here he was now, propped up in this bed, dressed in nothing but a pair of underwear with no sign of that suit. He was a sickly color, and I could not look anymore. The entire thing was a mess, and I needed to get it cleaned up right now before anyone could say, before anyone could find out this horrible, sick sight. I had put the word out to other nearby towns to keep a lookout for Morty. I gave them a description of him and even forwarded a picture and asked for any information possible. I had to call in backup from the city. I did not have enough people to deal with this mess. Investigators got involved, and this stirred up a lot of panic from the locals. Lots of people were asking questions, asking to be told what actually happened. We managed to bury the bodies as discreetly as possible. We did our very best to tidy up the graves and redress the bodies and just make sure the remains were not all grimy and dirty. I never did find that wedding suit though. Morty's house was essentially sealed up as a crime scene, and I was basically just supervising at that point. I felt useless, just completely and utterly useless, just standing there like a lemon, only being able to tell the people doing the real work little tidbits about the guy or about the town. We had received no information about him skipping town, and it seemed a little bit hopeless. Morty did eventually turn back up though.
we did eventually find him. Although I suppose found is certainly a choice of a word. It was actually brought to my attention by one of the investigators. They had finally gotten around to canvassing the cemetery after a couple of days and were looking for any evidence to track down Morty or any kind of motive to get inside his mind. They were slow workers, thorough but excruciatingly slow. The graves had obviously been sealed off to public access for a little while the investigations went on, and I still had an officer rotating back and forth, patrolling around the grave around the nearby area. But when they got there and they checked, they told me that one of the graves had clearly been dug up and then repacked very recently, probably in the last week or so. We dug the grave back up, and the sight that I saw right in front of me, it should not have been possible. It made me feel scared. Before, I had just felt sick and angry almost, but now I felt this fear that I could not explain. In the coffin, buried in this grave, was the old remains of a woman. Just barely a skeleton, slowly decomposing, getting worse and worse. But that corpse was not the only thing inside this grave. In the grave, next to this corpse, Morty was right there. He was very clearly dead. He had his arms wrapped around the skeletal remains that were right next to him in the grave, as if he had them in an embrace and was giving the remains a tight hug. The grave of the woman that he was in, the woman was his mother. He was dead inside his own mother's grave, but how? The investigators did not have an explanation right then and there, and it didn't really seem like they wanted one either. It seemed like they just wanted to be done with the case and shelve it all away. Morty had wounds on his body. He had cuts and bruises on his face and what looked like a deep slash across his neck. But even if Morty had done that to himself, who buried him? And also, there was no knife inside the grave or at the scene, at least not from what I could see or tell. And how did he manage to get himself perfectly inside the grave, in that position, while killing himself at the same time? None of it made any sense whatsoever. And the thing about Morty's body was that he had already started to decompose. Not dramatically, but his body looked a lot more far gone than it should have been at that stage if our estimates were correct. I was asked to lie to the townspeople about Morty. I was asked to stick to the story and tell them that he killed himself while lying in his mother's open grave and not mention anything about the house, that he was a very mentally unwell man and wanted to be with her. I, of course, decided to keep quiet about that and the bodies in the house. I knew that no one would be able to handle that. How could you stay living in your own home, knowing that something so horrible like that had happened just next door or just down the street? You would never sleep soundly ever again. Hey, so, I figured I should tell my story here. I'm from a small town in Missouri, in the Ozarks to be specific. It's a great vacation country if you ever want something scenic, though to be honest, Yellowstone is probably a better investment unless the Ozarks are closer to you. Anyways, since most people in my town are stuck in the 1970s in terms of technology, I figure they won't find out about this. Ever since maybe the 1950s, we've been having some troubles in our town, and no, I'm not going to tell you which town. It's probably better that way. Regardless, I would be a bit more specific, but people are just so vague and tight-lipped. I never really understood that. But, near the woods where our town is, adjacent to a lake and stream, there is a bit of marshland that has some caves that go into a mountain. Keep in mind that when I say mountain, I really mean big fucking hill. Luckily for all of us, it's kind of out of the way of most tourist spots. But, ever since I've been young, I've been told not to go there. Basically, everyone I have asked has just said that the area is dangerous, unstable, and has a lot of sinkholes, etc. Well, that was good enough for me, until a few years ago, at least. Some tourists had decided to hike near there, and basically everyone they talked to said that that was a bad idea. They told them the same things that they told me. The ground was unstable, there were sinkholes into cave systems, etc. Well, they did not listen, and let me tell you, these guys were hardcore. There was a group of 5 of them, and they were all really badass nature lover types. They had equipment, high-end camping gear, camelbacks. I think most of them must have been ex-military. A few of them even had mountaineers kits with picks and stakes and rope, and yes, we do have a few climbing spots out here. I really thought nothing of it myself when they set out. I figured they would take care of themselves and just go about their business. That was until they did not return for a week. They had set out with supplies to last about 3 or maybe 4 days. They've been gone for 7. Most people in the town were upset, saying that they might upset them or cause another swarm to happen. I really only overheard this from the older folks. Most people under 40 did not know what was happening either. We were on the verge of calling for the rangers when 2 of them stumbled back into town. They were not in good shape. One of them was covered in what looked like bug bites, and the other was a lot worse. I will call them red and blue, since they were wearing red and blue, duh. Red was the one covered in bug bites, and blue was the one that he was carrying. There was something terribly wrong with him. He was all grey, like his skin, and I could swear I could see his skin visibly crawling. I distinctly remember his moans and how thick, blackish blood dribbled out from the corner of his mouth, leaving a trail of the stuff on the streets. For a bit of context, I work as a clerk at a small mom-and-pop shop directly across from our clinic. I came to see the spectacle during a morning shift, where I'd heard the burning rubber across the street. Being a small town of around 600 to 800 people, we have a real help your fellow man kind of attitude. So, I approached the sound to see the spectacle right before me. They were just about to get into the building when Blue just started vomiting. I myself was exiting the store and approaching them, intent on helping however I possibly could, so I could see everything very clearly. Blue's vomit was chunky. It was like blood and a tan liquid marbled together, with balls of what looked like sponge. Red stopped and set his friend down at the noise. He was carrying him on his back and seemed to recoil. Blue retched again, but this time, a swarm of wheel bugs came out. It was the freakiest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. He kept vomiting and vomiting, and it was like I could see his body just shrinking. I ran back inside after that. I heard sirens shortly after, our town sheriff. I hid behind a few shelves and I could hear a commotion. A few people were shouting out words. When it stopped, I looked back outside and I saw the sheriff and the town pastor standing over Red and Blue. They both looked like they'd been half-eaten by some kind of wild creature, though Blue looked a little bit more like Swiss cheese. The pastor had a mask on. It looked like a painting respirator, and he was drizzling what looked like a flask of holy water on the corpses. They caught fire. I was just numb at that point, not even nauseous. I did puke a lot later though, and even now, I have to take breaks whenever I imagine those balls of flesh. It has been a few months now, and a couple of people have gone missing since then. I looked into the town's history anywhere that I could find it, and I found out that there have been bursts of people going missing over the course of a few months throughout the years, always in the fall, which was the time that my story occurred. But not every year. Once maybe every 8 or 9 years. Come to think of it, I can remember a few kids going missing at school, along with a known predator who lived in the town who was thought to have taken them to that marsh. Does anyone have any idea what the hell is going on in my town? What might be in that marsh? I have never seen wheel bugs act like that before, and I've been bitten by them before. It was like something out of a messed up horror movie. I had one experience that I chalked up to sleep paralysis as well, but it felt way too real. I'm not sure if it's even scary enough to go here, but this happened to me 3 or so years ago. I wake up at my usual weird time at 3 a.m. I have been having relatively normal dreams and nightmares. Some good, some definitely a little bit freaky, like teeth falling out, etc. I was rolling around in my half-awake state for what felt like a few minutes. I said screw this, I am trying to go back to sleep. Maybe another couple of minutes pass, or so it feels like. Another dream starts up, this time in my room. The pile of clothes on the chair does the usual scare tactic. I am pretty much on the verge of dismissing what I saw as a bunch of nothing, or whatever the dream equal of that would be, when I notice something different. There is something different near my door. The previously empty space was now occupied by an undescriptive black mass, actively blocking the light coming from underneath my door. I realize that everything in the room has suddenly become much more in focus. It's not the half-muddied dream style anymore. I immediately shut my eyes, or tried to. My vision at least went black. I hear the sound of chains slowly dragging across the carpet, and then I heard a very muffled clink. I hear raspy breathing coming along with it. It's getting closer and closer to me. Something about this feels really real and different in a bad way. My eyes are still closed. I feel a heavy weight press down onto my shoulder, and I swear to God, I can feel the breath of this thing hitting my ear as it rasps right next to me. It was what felt like an eternity of something pressing its full body weight down onto me. Then it just ends. I open up my eyes, and the room is just as normal. I spent the next few hours before work just silently crying to myself and trying to cope. But the thing is, I never actually woke back up, like in a regular dream. I just opened my eyes when the weight went away, like I was fully conscious the whole time. I am genuinely still freaked out today. I have no clue if it was sleep paralysis or what. Okay, so when this happened to me, I was living in Adelaide in southern Australia. I went up to Waterfall Gully at night with my girlfriend. We were basically on a hiking trail leading up to Mount Lofty. It starts at a waterfall at the beginning of the hike. We are walking up the steps towards the waterfall there with my girlfriend, and I had a flashlight along with me. The trail does a sort of curve to the right and then left at the top, right before the trail. Right before the trail starts, there used to be, it's gone now by the way, but old Google Maps still has images of the thing. There was a sign advising hikers to clean their shoes on a small foot cleaner thing, so as not to introduce foreign seeds or etc. up the trail. As my high-powered torch is illuminating the sign, I notice that to the edge of my vision, which is looking up the trail right behind where the sign is, I can see a person just standing there. It's probably 6 feet tall at least. It's very brightly illuminated due to my torch. It's almost pure white. The outfit actually reminds me of a fireman's outfit. As I realize he is there, I begin to turn my torch up to the trail to look directly at him. He must be about 15 meters away from me. Before I directly look at him, my girlfriend says my name. I turn to my girlfriend for some reason. I can't explain why. I just felt compelled to do so, like I was forced to turn around and look at her and take my eyes off of him. And then I turn back. There is no one up that trail for at least 100 meters. There is a sheer cliff drop on both sides and a small river right next to it. I looked around and I could not figure out where a human could have possibly gone in that split second that I turned away from him. I didn't even want to turn. It felt like I was turned by some kind of unseen force, like I was made to. That was the freakiest part about all of that. My girlfriend realized that something was very, very wrong, and we got the hell out of there. They have since installed a gate to stop people going up there at night. I actually googled to see if anything weird had happened in the area, like urban legends or disappearances, and apparently, around 100 years ago, a young police officer died there and is thought to be haunting the place. They call him the Blue Ghost, but what I saw was not blue at all. He is apparently a very common sighting by the cafe staff that work nearby. Lots of people have died around that area apparently. Some people have just up and vanished. although it's speculated that most of them just fell over and died from the fall because that cliff is pretty damn steep.